Welcome to Helsinki Open Waves. You are listening to Ferment Radio, a podcast series on bacterial and social fermentation. Fermentation can incite social action, spark creativity, and bring surprising new tastes to our lives. My name is Aga Pokrywka, and I invite you to join us in a conversation on living interconnectivities. From macro to micro, from societal to cellular, and from global to personal. We have often spoken about purity on Ferment Radio. In this episode, we want to go farther and talk about the culture of shame, hiding processes, language taboos, and the politics of silence. In other words, the key we will talk about is how the female body, the body of anyone who has vagina, is constructed socially. Whatever you put in or out your vagina has the potential of disrupting your vaginal balance. The biggest vaginal microbiome disruptors are personal hygiene products, antibiotics, intercourse, tampons, menstruation, and contraception methods. Every vaginal microbiome is completely unique, and there is no one-size-fits-all. However, research shows us that having less than 90% of Lactobacillus puts you at the risk of vaginal dysbiosis, which loosely translates as too much bacteria. Although most people with a vagina will experience vaginosis at least once in their lifetime, why is a vaginal health still a taboo? Addressing this question is the core work of today's guest on Ferment Radio. Giulia Tomasello is a designer committed to innovating women's healthcare by combining biotechnology and interactive wearables.
Hello, I'm Giulia Tomasello. I'm an interaction designer, or a mix also as a biohacker, and I'm Italian, based in Berlin at the moment, and quite nomad. And I'm specialized in the field of biotextiles, electronic textiles, which I apply them in the field of female intimate care. So what I'm really interested is this knowledge of care and how technology can be a tool to democratize it.
You often refer in your work to the concept of a woman's body and her relationship to it being mostly influenced by the societal norms. And I wonder, what would be those norms, what would be those assumptions which are harmful regarding female body?
Yes, I always like to start actually when I introduce my work with a quote from Simone de Beauvoir in her book, The Second Sex, where she says, "That's me, I'm a woman, I have a body, and my body is a social construction rather than a naturally given datum." And what I translate every time is really these feelings that as a female body in the society, you always have like a kind of a double profile. So the female that actually is constructed by what the society wants to see from you, and at the same time the female that is indeed made to give birth. And I like to sit in this two type of context because at the same time we would like maybe to be different, but because of the constraints and the taboos that are in the society, which also depending where you live and your cultural background, it always changes and it has a different layer. We, of course, don't feel free. And I'm always wondering if like the tools that actually we can develop through technology, through also biohacking, if they can really empower us to let us free and at the same time to let us conscious and change some part of the society.
So how in your work, you mentioned biohacking, you also mentioned one of the projects you're working on, how biohacking and this perception of the female body meets together in your work?
everything started quite by chance. So it was during my studies in Central St. Martin's during my master. I became aware of all this world of the biophilia. So actually all living organism that surround us and that we are part of. And of course, of all also the microorganisms that are part of us, that we don't see them because they're an invisible layer, part of our microbiome. But that at the time when I started to be aware of this world, the only studies, they were saying that actually the 90% of our microbiome was made of microorganisms, bacteria, and fungi, and only 10% of human cell. So it was quite striking, this news. And then I saw that few years later, so I started to work on it from 2014, and let's say already in 2017, studies changing, confirming that actually it's a 50-50. So we have this 50% of microorganism and 50% of human cell. And of course, this studies is coming from the Human Microbiome Project, which at the same time, it's an early study, like it's from the early 2000s that we know that we are made of microorganisms. And as a designer, I was just curious to really understand what is this symbiotic relationship that we constantly have. And then since I'm interested in working with wearables, with second layers, I really wanted to understand, okay, what is really even the relationship between microorganism and our body? And then going into the body, like this really notion of what is a woman in a society always made me think a lot. So of course I come maybe also from a political point of view, which is never really too, how to say, like I never show it too much as the first thing. But of course the conversation I create usually around my pieces are quite political. And biohacking became the tool to empower female. So what I started to do in 2015 was to grow bacteria at home. So I started with cellulose, with kombucha, and then I started to grow bacteria, especially Lactobacillus, which are the same bacteria that you can find in yogurt, for example, that are part of the probiotics, but also the majority of bacteria that you can find in the vaginal flora. And that was really interesting for me because, of course, it opened up another world of knowing that women already in the past, they were using yogurt to treat their vaginal infection. They were just putting yogurt in the underwear. And so this knowledge of being like made of bacteria, it was always there, but never really proven or like, of course, like written on a scientific paper to really justify it and say, yes, like every time we take care of ourselves, maybe antibiotics are not always doing the right work because they are just swiping everything rather than supporting what we are made of. And also biohacking itself as a technique allow me to really appropriate skills that are not part of my studies and my expertise. So like being a scientist and a biologist, and at the same time being a scientist and a biologist at home. So I learned how to grow bacteria in a sterile environment, like which it could be my kitchen, which of course it was not sterile, but growing bacteria on like near the fire in the hub, like in the kitchen, like in the stove, it was actually kind of clean enough to then grow some specimen. The Lactobacillus I was growing sometimes were part of my bodies, so from the vagina, or other times were like powder bacteria, so crystallized the bacteria in powder that were like from some pill I was buying in the pharmacy, which at the same time are probiotics that we as women we are taking when we have some vaginal infection. So everything was just connecting in a loop. And I found it super like I found it very close to me. So I was growing those bacteria in my room, which is not something I'm suggesting, of course, but at the time as a student, it was really my way to understand these experiments, but also understand really the symbiosis. And I was growing them with some textile as well to see how bacteria could merge with textile or not.
What is your observation actually about growing the bacteria on a textile? That sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I failed many times, or I don't know if to call it failure, because in a way, of course, because I was not growing in a sterile environment, most of the time the bacteria were overgrowing in a fungi and just creating like a beautiful at the same time fungi pattern, but kind of course, not pleasant color to really recognize it as a proper bacteria. And but what it was interesting is that it was quite beautiful. Like you could really see that it will just make sense. Like it will just be normal maybe one day to wear, of course, biotextiles or textiles made of bacteria. And then this translation helped me to understand, okay, what if we would wear bacteria also in our garment to replace constantly a flora that during our everyday daily routine, we sometimes lose them because we had the society taught us that we should wash our hands every day before eating, that we should bleach every corner of the place where we walk or where we eat because it's dirty. And of course, the dirtiness is like towards the bacteria, but at the same time, this concept of dirty, especially from the 50s, is coming because of like the dirty and the race, the black and the white. So it really has a strong connotation, which then just made us really unaware that we are made of bacteria. So what I like to sometimes also remember when I explain about the microbiome is that, like in English and also in Italian, sometimes you say, I feel that I have to do this because I feel it from my gut. Like, is the gut telling me that I should do something? So it's not my brain, but it's my gut. And actually, it's real because the gut has the majority of and the diversity of bacteria that is part of us, and it actually makes us unique and different from others. And then another funny part is that, of course, our microbiome comes from the vagina of our mother. So especially if we burn with the natural giving birth, like our first microbiome is really coming from the vagina of our mother. And then recent studies were saying that if some kids are born with the C-section, they could actually be more prone to get some illness like in the future. So all of those really like small insights really made me realize that, yeah, we should just pay more attention. We should just really be aware, which it doesn't mean that we should never wash our hand anymore or that we should really go against it, but just to be a bit more aware, to just really understand that, yes, like when antibiotic came, when Western medicine came so strongly, it was really also with a specific we can also argue political act behind. So how can we also go back to nature by accepting nature, by feeling part of them?
So I guess this all kind of got fermented in your project called Future Flora, right? Could you tell us more about it and how does it work? What's the concept about?
Of course. So Future Flora is the project I developed from this bacteria growing in my room, and especially from the experiment of bacteria and textile. And Future Flora is a harvesting kit designed for women to treat and prevent vaginal infection. So in this kit, which looks like a petri dish, you have three different components. So one part as an instruction for female to actually use it at home. One part as like different tools. So for example, inoculators or a pipette with inside like frozen bacteria of an healthy vaginal flora. and tweezers. And then the third part is made already with a pad made of agar-agar. So the point is that you will be at home, and if you are one of the females suffering of vaginal infection, you will grow your healthy bacteria, your healthy bacterial pad at home to actually replace the flora that is missing. So it's really a sort of taking care of your body and yourself by also being a scientist, like being a participant in this world of science and technology, which most of the time is dominated by male, which most of the time we don't really even have access to much, because the first thing maybe when we are sick, it's either to not really talk about with people or to go to the pharmacy and take the first cream that we see, even though we are not really able to recognize which infection it is, and or going to the doctor, but at the same time accepting to take antibiotics instead of really understanding how I can prevent it. So this kit is really made to try to go for prevention and to have always an healthy vaginal flora, rather than accepting that antibiotics should always work. And statistically, we are talking about the 75% of women worldwide that can suffer at least once in their lifetime of vaginal infection like Candida. And so it's a huge number. So of course, it's something that we as female, we should first not feel ashamed to even have it or talk about, but at the same time be aware of what we could do. And so Future Flora really is it's a speculative kit, like it doesn't work, it doesn't exist, but at the same time it's a tool for a conversation to really show, okay, if biohacking one day will be normal, if we will have in our daily life an incubator at home, why not that we can grow bacteria at home, like healthy bacteria that we can wear in our underwear and constantly have a healthy flora that will protect us.
Mm-hmm. Looking at your work, it gives me this feeling that you want to use technology in order to reconnect with own body. And on one hand, I feel it could be like a contradiction, because why, if we are ought to kind of reconnect with something which would be part of our nature, why we would need technology? Is it something I'm kind of... it's more of a spark for the conversation rather than questioning it, because personally I like this contradiction, but I just wanted to hear if you have some reflections on that point.
Yeah, I do have some reflections. So I see totally this contradiction, because why technology should be part of us? But at the same time, I'm just conscious that technology is part of us. Like the reason why we're able to even do this podcast from Helsinki to Berlin is because it's through technology. How we came also in contact is through technology. So technology in one shape or another is already coming closer and closer to our body. And I really believe even to our skin, and one day probably embedded. And I'm just trying to find ways on how we can actually use technology, not as the successful and brilliant product, but actually as just a tool to achieve something that maybe 30 years ago would be impossible. And now, because we have this technology, we can achieve it. So to really kind of go around the technology and just use it. And this type of principle, I use it also in my teaching. So since 2017, I'm teaching, I'm lecturer in different universities, like really trying to bring a notion of electronic textiles, biotextiles, coding with Arduino, an open source platform, and really also bringing methodologies of do-it-yourself techniques, of open source, and showing that should be the direction we should go if we think that technology is really coming and embedded in our body. So not really only accepting it or like accepting the use, but also understanding what is behind. Like, how can I hack it at the same time, this technology, to make it useful for myself or for the society? And so it's not anymore, again, like using a specific technology, but own it and being aware, okay, yes, maybe like having like a like Bluetooth headphones is important, but at the same time now, like I can hack them and use them for something else. And I think it's just very powerful, and especially when you bring it in universities, it just shows to students like the huge like scenario and possibilities that they can then now create. And this is why then I'm not scared to really bring technology in those type of contexts, because I can just see it as a way to actually kind of go against what the society always told us, that we should just live in the taboo. And so I really found like I would like to use technology really as a way to democratize it and to destigmatize taboo, even though most of the time, of course, it's very difficult, especially when we think about electronic textile or even biotextiles, to really bring it in the reality and the everyday. It's still difficult. We don't have yet a technological innovation to really implement things. But at the same time, what speculative design can do is to really propose this type of scenario. And this is what I'm interested in to really bring this type of speculative scenario, and at the same time maybe prototype low technology kit that can show what is possible now and what one day it could actually happen.
It seems also that it breaks maybe two taboos at the same time, because we were talking about the taboos around female health, but also it's kind of a taboo that in tech there is still majority of men, and female are still kind of, well, for sure, like the situation is changing all the time, but I think it's still kind of an issue. So it's great that it's kind of pushing on in those two kind of fragile points still. But we were talking about like low tech and future flora, but also I know that you work together with other people on projects which a little bit more complex tech embedded in there. If you could just tell our listeners more about it, since I found it also very exciting.
Of course. So Future Flora, it's a project I developed for my master thesis in material futures in Central St. Martin's in 2016. And at the time, already talking about those topics about social female taboos and how technology can probably break them, it was quite striking. It was quite new. But then, like in 2017, already with the movement of the hashtag #MeToo, everything became a bit more normal. Like there was a new wave of feminism, which I think we are still on it, especially talking like from an inclusive gender or gender fluid society, that really allowed this type of conversation like Future Flora to have space. So what happened is that after 2 years of my thesis, meanwhile, I developed a documentary which actually showed how women would use it or not, and what do they know actually of microbiome. Like, would they wear bacteria in the underwear? Probably the first answer is no. But then by just getting the knowledge, you will accept it in a different way. And in 2018, beside being awarded with Future Flora, with the Starts Prize from Ars Electronica, which is a prize as an honor in technology and science for the arts. So by really already shifting a student project to something that, yes, is something we should talk about. At the same time, I was already in contact with a scientist called Tommaso Busolo, which now is my co-founder and colleague. And together we developed a project called ALMA. So ALMA is was at the beginning kind of the big sister of Future Flora, and now it became a bigger system. So in 2018, what we did, we developed a sensor which is able to monitor the pH of vaginal fluids. And the point was really trying to bring a sort of Future Flora concept for the near future. Because if really Future Flora talks in a future of 15 years or even more, like what if actually wearable technology can be a closer future? And Tommaso is a material science specialized in electronic textiles, really from the fiber point of view. And so our energies really met in between, and we felt that pushing it again in the female intimate care was the right direction. And this sensor we developed at the beginning with a really small fund, actually an open source fund in Cambridge, and it already resonated a lot of attention. So yes, maybe it could be possible one day to have a sensor that you wear in the underwear and that just silently tells you, hey, maybe if you have some symptoms, it's because also your pH is changing and a vaginal infection is coming. Because the pH is really the best indicator for us to understand if bacterial vaginosis, for example, is in place. And it's just a simple notion as that probably the majority of us doesn't know. And why we don't know? Just because nobody told us. So then this project grew a lot. So now in 2021, we are 4 co-founders. So it's me and Tommaso. And then we have Rio Mizuta, which is an engineer in nanoscience and in Cambridge, and also Isabel Farina, which is a medical anthropologist. And so this really interdisciplinary group just created something more. So, and we grew also through a European funding called Reframe, and at the same time, an incubator which we are now part of in Berlin, and that help us to understand that Alma has to be taken really from an holistic point of view. So now we are not developing only the underwear, but we are developing also the community, we are really combining design, technology, and anthropology to co-create tools to create a change in female intimate care. So to really shift a culture that is always considered a culture of silence and taboos into something that should be really important and just normal, also to normalize it. And so the participatory methods and those workshops we run around the world was to, of course, create knowledge about it and to at the same time co-design the sensor with users. And now we moved into another type of workshop where we are co-creating together a community platform. And an interesting part, of course, now from Future Flora to Alma to see is that, for example, the workshop that we were doing from Brazil to Asia and that we called Alma Meets Flora, of course, it looks like 2 girls meeting up, but at the same time was the Alma sensor meeting the vaginal flora. And now we moved to Alma Connects Flora workshop because it's Alma, the whole big network that we are creating, connecting with flora, which could be each of us, just as female, that we want to actually give a voice to this type of topic. So it's becoming something bigger, which also we don't know where it's going. Technically now, the sensor from a textile sensor that we developed working with Fraunhofer at ZM in Berlin, now is going back to the lab in Cambridge. And so from today, actually, Tommaso and Rio will start a postdoc to really bringing it further. And from the community point of view, this platform, we are just at the beginning. So we are developing now an atlas where it will be open source and bottom-up based. So like Wikipedia is made by user writing about things. And we hope that this atlas of experiences will be a platform where female will anonymously write about their experiences on female intimate care about different topics to really just create knowledge and to really try slowly to to also bring everything normal.
I like that in your work, like everything is kind of interconnected, like one sprouts from another, and it's kind of a network of various connections also between your activities. But coming back to like tech and female health, when I was preparing for this conversation, I started to look for the dates of when, I don't know, tampon got invented or birth control pill. And I was especially surprised with tampon. The tampon is almost like 100 years old, and the birth control pill is like, 60 years old. And there, to be very honest, at least to my knowledge, there is not much of innovation in like a female health happening. Do you have some favorite companies or products or people who work within this, I don't know, genre of female health?
Yes, well, it's like a company which I admire a lot, especially from their marketing campaign point of view. And I'm using things since 5 years, so I'm a big fan. And beside the investment you have to do, of course, to even buy one or two underwears, because of course one doesn't really always make sense. Um, it's something I always suggest to everyone. And what I do since already 2 years is really trying also different brands, especially European, and bring them to Italy, which still is not there yet to even accepting it. But this is one way to normalize periods, which is something that has been always also stigmatized. So things, yes, I really love the way they talk about it. And also from a marketing point of view, I'm really a big fan of Libres, which you recently, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, they've been really campaigning to show, actually in the past, they're always showing a blue liquid, but actually our blood is red, as every blood. So, or actually, yes, you can run a marathon during period. It's normal. And yes, we bleed every day, every month. Like, so it happens sometimes that we bleed and we are sick and we cannot work. Like, to really normalize it. And so SCT, so the whole group behind Libres, which is SCT, works very well on democratizing female health, especially from a period point of view, for the products that they sell. And then if we open up to the whole femtech companies that now are the trend, we can also argue that are really leading this type of field. I struggle to really find the one which I'm really in love, I have to be honest, because I see many loopholes there. Like for me, already calling a startup femtech, it's already a challenge, which I don't always like to be called, because it looks like that it's only for female, while of course talking about vaginal infection, like men, they maybe don't think about, but of course they have a partner or a mother or a sister that can have it, so it also matters them. It really it really, what we really push a lot in Alma is it's showing that those topics really affects everything. And so the holistic point of view, the inclusivity is by default. It's really just part of the whole conversation. And so when they call me femtech, I'm like, yeah, but I'm also health tech, I'm wearable tech, whatever you want to call it, because the point is not to call it and to label it again, but just to talk about. So in the femtech, sometimes what I see is that you like those startups, they really tend to just stay on this femtech bubble, rather than allowing themselves to see that female intimate care should be really different, the way that they should also bring it in their companies. But I really like the philosophy of Clue, and the founder of Clue, Ida, like the way that she also really talks about privacy and data in about female intimate care. It's very important. So I really admire all her work that she's been doing, especially like on data.
Yeah, it's an amazing app for tracking period, basically, and the whole the cycle. Yeah, I
Yes.
also use it. I as a user, I recommend.
Yeah, and Clue recently got in US like the recognition to even certify which could be really the day of ovulation. So not only anymore like the window as the majority of the fertility app they do, but really also giving the day. And what they have also very important, it's a huge blog which they call the encyclopedia, which just give a lot of knowledge behind. So why we're talking about menstrual health? Because this is what we should read about and we should know. So every time just showing where we are coming from. Yes.
Yeah, and what about your like biggest inspiration? I'm talking here mostly about books, films, or maybe some figures who influence your work and how you think about your work the most.
Okay, so I have maybe few inspirations. So from a biodesign point of view, I've been always fascinated by the work of Sonja Baumel. She is an Austrian artist living in Netherlands and working in Netherlands, and her work concentrates on the relationship of her body, especially with the microbiome. So she was one of the pioneer artists working with microbiome when microbiome was not even written in books, and she was just like making it clear through her works, which most of the time included also performance and really her body performing in a huge petri dish and just growing herself and just really translating it in something physical or something visual, maybe, because most of the time we just don't see it and we just are not aware indeed. And so she's one of my biggest inspiration. And I had the occasion to have a talk with her a few years ago at the MAC, the Museum of Art Contemporary in Vienna, because we are both exhibiting there. And it was really clear that really all my references were really coming from her also work. So it was an honor to just be with her. And I just like also, I'm just bringing it also in a different layer with also wearable technology and female health. And then another big inspiration, which I'm constantly like reading about, are the women's in Boston, or all the female that in the 70s and from the 60s to the 70s, they were just like meeting in collectives and talk about self-help and self-conscious. So really developing those methods to just again democratize taboos, make it normal to look at your vulva and discover your cervix, and really just make it also in between, like in group, so with other women, which is the of course magic behind. And yes, so that specific moment or movement which happened in their times is something that's fascinated me a lot, and which is really is something that we are constantly taking from them. So we are really coming with their philosophy in what we are doing now with them.
Mm-hmm. It seems that since you graduated your studies and your the first project we've been talking here about, you went through a very long journey, and I'm sure lots of learning and discoveries were made on the way. But I wanted to ask you, what would be that? What is something new you haven't pay attention to, or maybe you didn't know before starting to work in that big territory of female health and tech and biotech and so on?
Mainly working on female health is that Well, I come from Italy, and even though I left Italy years ago, of course, I grew up in a more conservative and very Christian society and family, which didn't really close me up, but at the same time, of course, was just directing me in specific direction. So many things were just hidden or just not known for me. And just by going out and really traveling for me and meeting people, that was the way for me to really like reveal many like petals of a flower that I just didn't know they were there. And at the same time showing like having the like seeing that many female actually wants to really make a difference. And so probably what for me was always a frustration, and I was not even able with words to explicit and say, yes, I believe that actually society is patriarchal. At the time, I was just able through projects to make it, to show it. And what happened also in this arch of time, like from really future flora until now, is that I'm totally conscious of why I'm doing a specific job, why I'm doing it through design, which that is my way, but where I'm coming from. And I know really like what are the points that really I'm struggling with. And what I now want to discover even more is how different societies in different parts of the world are trying already to do it. And this is what I'm already discovering, but really trying to collaborate in a bigger scale to see, okay, what it could be kind of the fil rouge or the meta level that at least now, because also our life is not so long, we can still do to make a little change. So not to really create the change because it's impossible, it's too ambitious, but still the little change that at least through language or really maybe through biohacking can make a difference. And that is something I'm just fascinated, and it's really kind of is the fire that leads me to work every day in what I do and in teaching, because in teaching I really bring a lot of this. I push students to really think towards a social impact, because for me it's really the way that it will make sense to use design.
Mm-hmm. When you said about making change also in the language, I'm also thinking throughout our conversation that what do we actually mean while saying female health, right? Because vaginas are not just, a female thing. There are various kind of, I don't know, like... notions of who considers themselves a female and who has vagina. This is not so clear, and I think that also you were mentioning those companies, femtech. I think they work quite a lot through those polarities, at least those which I've been seeing. And I was even thinking, should we develop together a different wording for that? Because I also find it like problematic, or it's not enough inclusive. But it's also a process.
Yes, it is problematic, and it's something that more than like change it should be in a constant evolution. Because of course before was only health, then barely men health, but just not clarifying the men, and then women health, and then female health. We somehow moved to female, and we use the word female all the time, but then we specify even when we present in our slides that for us a female is a woman with a trans experience, or a trans woman. So really to open up this term. But yes, it should be people health.
Change has to happen not just in detabooing intimate health, but also in terms of language. Unlearning habits that oppress us and others is a long journey. Thank you, Giulia, for being there with us. If you would like to know more about the show, listen to this episode again, or find previous episodes, please go to helsinkiopenwaves.com or fermentradio.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. I'm always looking forward to hearing from you at hello@fermentradio.com. Ferment Radio is broadcast by Helsinki Open Waves, supported by Culture of Cultures and produced by Super Eclectic. Thank you for listening, keep fermenting, and stay tuned for the next episode of Ferment Radio.